What role does love play in this whole thing, in the human condition? In all the study of genocide, it does seem that hardship in moments brings out the best in human nature, and the best in human nature is expressed through love.
Well,
Friendship,
as I
love.
already mentioned to you, I think hardship is not a good thing for it's not the best thing for love. I mean, it's better to not have to suffer and not
You
have
think
to.
so?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's you know, as I mentioned to you, studying concentration camps. This is not a place for love. It happens, but it's not really a place for love. It's a place for rape. It's a place for torture. It's a place for killing, and it's a place for inhuman action, one to another, And also, as I said, among those who are suffering, not just between those who are, and then there are whole gradations, the same thing in the Gulag. There are gradations all the way from the criminal prisoners who beat the hell out of the political prisoners, who then have others below them who they beat the, so everybody's beating the hell out of everybody else. So I would not idealize in any way suffering as a
source of beauty.
A source of beauty and love. I wouldn't do
But
that.
see,
at all.
so
I think it's a whole lot better for people to be relatively prosperous. I'm not saying super prosperous, but to be able to feed themselves and to be able to feed their families and house their families and take care of themselves, to foster loving relations between people. And, I think it's no accident that, poor families have much, worse records when it comes to crime and things like that, and also to wife beating and to child abuse and stuff like that. I mean, you don't want to be poor and indigent and not have a roof over your head, be homeless. I mean, it doesn't mean, again, homeless people are mean people. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that, what we want to try to foster in this country and around the world. And one of the reasons, I'm very critical of the Chinese in a lot of ways, but we have to remember they pulled that country out of horrible poverty, right? And there's still poor people in the countryside. There's still problems, with want and need among the Chinese people. But, there were millions and millions of Chinese who were living at the bare minimum of life, which is no way to live, and no way, again, to foster love and compassion and getting along. So I want to be clear. I don't speak for history, right? I'm giving you, there used to be historians, in the 19th century who really thought they were speaking for history.
Yeah.
I don't think that way at all. I understand I'm a subjective human being with my own points of view and my own opinions, but
I'm trying to remember in this conversation that you're, despite the fact that you're brilliant and you've written brilliant books, that you're just human.
Well, I am.
With an opinion.
I am. That's it. Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And I tell my students that too. I make sure they understand this is not history speaking. This is me and Norman, and I'm and this is what it's about. I've spent a long time studying history,
yes,
and have enjoyed it enormously. But I'm an individual with my points of view, and one of them is that I've developed over time is that human want is a real tragedy for people, and it hurts people, and it also causes upheavals and difficulties and stuff like that. So I feel for people. I feel for people in Syria. I feel for people in Ethiopia and Tigray, when they don't have enough to eat. And, what that does, it doesn't mean they don't love each other, right? And it doesn't mean they don't love their kids. But it does mean that it's harder, to do that
I'm not so sure. It's obvious to me that it's harder. There's suffering, but the numbers, we've been talking about deaths, been talking about suffering, but the numbers we're not quantifying. The history that you haven't perhaps been looking at is all the times that people have fallen in love deeply with friends, with romantic love, the positive emotion that people have felt. And I'm not so sure that amidst the suffering, those moments of beauty and love can't be discovered. And if we look at the numbers, I'm not so sure the story is obvious. I mean, again, I suppose you may disagree with Viktor Frankl. I may too, maybe depending on the day. I mean, he says that if there's meaning to this life at all, there's meaning to the suffering too, because suffering is part of life. There's something about accepting the ups and downs, even when the downs go very low, and within all of it, finding a source of meaning. I mean, he's arguing from the perspective of psychology, but just this life is an incredible gift, almost no matter what. And it's easy to look at suffering and think if we just escape the suffering, it will all be better. But we all die. There's beauty in the whole thing. And it is true that it's just, from all the stories I've read, especially in famine and starvation, it's just horrible. It is horrible suffering. But I also just want to say that there's love amidst it, and we can't forget that.
No, I don't forget it. I don't forget it. But
and I think it's from the stories. Now, I don't want to make that compromise or that trade, but the intensity of friendship in war, the intensity of love in war, is very high. So I'm not sure what to make of these calculations, but if you look at the stories, some of the people I'm closest with, and I've never experienced anything even close to any of this, but some of the people I'm closest with is people I've gone through difficult times with. There's something about that. There's a society or a group where things are easy. The intensity of the connection between human beings is not as strong. I don't know what to do with that calculus, because I too agree with you. I want to have as little suffering in the world as possible, but we have to remember about the love and the depth of human connection and find the right balance there.
No, there's something to what you're saying. There's clearly something to what you're saying. I was just thinking about the Soviet Union, when I lived there, and people on the streets were so mean to one another, and they never smiled. And you grew up there?
Yes.
No, but you're too young to.
No, I remember well. I came here when I was 13, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I remember living there and just how hard people were on each other on the streets. And when you got inside people's apartments, when they started to trust you, the friendships were so intense and so wonderful. So in that sense, I mean, they did live a hard life. But there was enough food on the table, and there was a roof over their heads.
There's a certain line.
There are lines. I don't think there's one line, but, it's kind of a shading. And the other story I was thinking of as you were talking was, it's not a story, it's a history, a book, by a friend of mine who wrote about love in the camps, in the refugee camps for Jews in Germany after the war. So these were Jews who had come mostly from Poland and were, some survived the camps, came from awful circumstances. And then they were put in these camps, which were not joyful places. I mean, they were guarded sometimes by Germans even, but they're basically under the British control, and they were trying to get to Israel, trying to get to Palestine right after the war. And how many pairs there were, how many people coupled up. But remember, this is after being in the concentration camp. It's not being in the concentration camp. And it's also being free, to more or less free, to express their emotions and to be human beings after this horrible thing which they suffered. So I wonder whether there's, as you say, some kind of calculus there where, the level of suffering is such that it's just too much for humans to bear. And, which I would suggest. I mean, I haven't studied this myself. I'm just giving you my point of view, my off-the-cuff remarks here. But it was very inspiring to read about these couples who had met right in these camps and started to couple up, and get married and try to find their way to Palestine, which was a difficult thing to do then.